Hey guys, I guess I'm finally ready to make this video with my division by division analysis. It is August 12th at 2 o'clock, so everything I have in here has been updated since then. Hopefully I haven't missed anything. Just to get things started in the beginning, I am letting y'all know what I mainly used. I used a lot of Pro Football Focus's website for a lot of stats. I looked up Vegas odds for each team's season win total, what their betting lines are. Did a lot of in-depth look at offensive line rankings, also by Pro Football Focus. Used the NFL's draft tracker and free agency report. Pretty much constantly kept up with that, as well as with the injury report list. Basically, how I'm going to go through each team is I have a list of players that are notable enough to mention that either joined the team or left the team. I've got a small analysis on what's good about them and what's bad about them, and my prediction or verdict on each of those teams. And at the end, after I go through all the teams, I will give my playoff predictions. So let's start with possibly the easiest team to predict. We're going to start in the AFC East with the New York Jets, possibly the worst football team I've ever seen. There's not really anything good that y'all can say about this team. I mean, we don't know who the quarterback's going to be. Probably their best player on the offense, or at least second best, was Quincy Enunwa. He's out for the year, so they have basically no wideouts. They picked up Josh McCown and Maurice Claiborne from the Cowboys, and they obviously lost Brandon Marshall, Fitzpatrick, and they haven't re-signed Revis yet as far as I know. So I'm assuming that he's not going to be playing for them this year. What's good about the Jets? I don't know. They've got a bunch of young players, so I mean, in 2 or 3 years they could do something, but I mean, that's just whether or not they're coached up or not. They still have Bilal Powell and Matt Forte and Leonard Williams. Those are the 3 best players left. It's just whether or not they end up wanting to stay there after how bad this season's going to be. What's bad about them? They don't really have any playmakers. They're young. Their quarterback is a total question mark. Probably could see 3 different quarterbacks play for them this year. They have nobody wide receivers. Their best signing of the year was Maurice Claiborne, and I would argue that he's not even that good. So that's really the only guy they picked up. I don't even know why they would get him, of all people. So my prediction for them is they're going to be the worst team in football. I think even the Browns, the Bears, and the 49ers are all going to do better than them. There's just nobody that could do this bad, at least in my opinion. At the worst, they're going to be in the bottom 3. Their Vegas odds are 5 wins this season. I'm going to go with the under. There's no way that this Jets team can win 5 games. I would be surprised if they win 2. They could legitimately go 0-16. I mean, they may sneak out a win against the Jaguars or the Browns, but that's going to be if they're lucky. We'll talk about the Bills next. So they got a couple of good players. They got Stephen Hauschka from the Seahawks. I guess they didn't re-sign him. Micah Hyde from the Packers. Mike Tolbert from the Panthers. And they've just recently signed Anquan Boldin. And we all, of course, know about the trade that recently happened. They gave up Sammy Watkins and Ronald Darby to get Jordan Matthews and another defensive back, while also picking up a 2nd and 3rd round pick next year from both the Rams and the Eagles. Personally, I like this trade. I don't think Sammy Watkins is really worth it. He's too injury prone. He has only played a full season once, and that was his rookie year, which he produced okay but not great numbers. Then he missed 4 games the next year, and I believe he missed half the season last year. I don't think his production isn't worth risking the injury for. I think they probably got the better trade out of this. I mean, Jordan Matthews is, I wouldn't say he's a star, but he's not bad either. So I feel like they're building up with those 2 picks. They really didn't lose any players. They lost Stephon Gilmore from the backfield as defensive back and Zach Brown. I mean, Stephon Gilmore was one of the better DBs. He went to New England, I believe. So that's a little bit of a loss. Good things about the Bills. We know LeSean McCoy is probably a top 3 running back. He's one of the best running backs in the league. And they also have a pretty solid offensive line for him to run behind. So that's a pretty good combination for them. The only real question mark is just whether or not Tyrod Taylor is going to play well, or if they even play him for the whole season, because I know there was a lot of questions about him coming into the season. For the bad for the Bills, I had Sammy Watkins' health on here. I can scratch that off now since he's no longer on that team. That's not even a question. They lost more defensive players than they gained. I mean, they got Micah Hyde, but I don't think that's a great trade for Stephon Gilmore. Gilmore was probably better. They've got a pretty rookie linebacker core, so the run defense is probably not going to be that great. Obviously, they have a new coach, so he's a rookie. There's not really much I can say about the Bills. I feel like they're a pretty average team. Their Vegas line is 6.5 wins. It's kind of hard for me to predict. I don't think they're going to win 7 games. I'd be surprised. So I'm going to take the under. I think they're going to win maybe 5, 6. 7 would be pretty lucky to me. I could see them easily being a 5-11 team or a 6-10, somewhere around there. Even with the Dolphins having the quarterback troubles that they have, I don't think they have enough of the rest of their team to pass the Dolphins. But it could be closer than I think, maybe. So for the Dolphins now, players they lost and gained. Obviously, Tannehill's out for the year. That's a huge blow. I really thought that if they had Tannehill, they could be a wild card team pretty easily. The rest of their team looks pretty solid. But I don't think that they've re-signed Mario Williams. He was on the team last year. As far as I know, he's not been re-signed, so he's not on the team. Obviously, they got Jay Cutler for, what was it, a 1 year, $10 million, or 2 years, something like that. I mean, without Tannehill, there's really no telling. Cutler's not that great. I personally thought they should have just gone with Matt Moore. Why would you sign Cutler for $10 million and then not start him? So they're probably going to end up starting Cutler. It's just a matter of how long he's going to stay before Matt Moore comes in. The good about them, they didn't really lose any players in the offseason other than Tannehill, obviously. So they pretty much kept the same team as last year and added a couple things. They've got a very good defensive line, obviously, with Ndamukong Suh and what's his name? Cameron Wake. Yeah. They've got a pretty strong offensive core with Ajayi, who should be as good as last year. I think he'll improve. It's just whether or not he stays healthy. I know he's had a concussion issue. He got it in practice not too long ago. So with what would have been Tannehill, Ajayi, and Jarvis Landry, that's no longer going to be the case with Tannehill, but I don't think their offense is going to play nearly as well without Tannehill. So they're definitely going to see a little bit of a drop off there. Their O-line is really not that great. It's pretty average. With Jay Cutler being back there, I really wouldn't put too much faith in them having a great offense, I guess. It's really going to be up to Ajayi, honestly, and he's going to have to be healthy. Their linebackers really aren't that great. They have some of the weakest linebackers in the league, but their secondary is very good. They have a lot of guys that have played 5+ years. Byron Maxwell's there now. Bobby McCain, he's there. So they've got some good guys. They got Nate Allen, too. My prediction was for them to make the wild card and make the playoffs. Now I don't think that's going to be the case. I had them pegged for 10+ wins. Vegas has them at 7 wins. I think 8-8 is achievable. 7-9 maybe more likely now. I'm just not sure. I would honestly take the push and say they win 7 games, but it wouldn't surprise me if they won 6 or 8. It's just they're not going to be nearly as good. It's really whether or not the Bills are going to beat them out for second, because we know the Patriots are going to win the division anyways. So for the Patriots, I don't have too much to say because it's New England. I mean, we know they're going to be good. Vegas has them at 12.5 wins. I'm going to take the over because they're going to win 14, maybe 15. If they lose more than 2 games, I would be very surprised, even with the schedule that they have. They lost Martellus Bennett. They lost LeGarrette Blount. They lost Chris Long, Logan Ryan, and Rob Ninkovich. That's a lot of losses. I mean, those are some pretty good players, but New England's pretty used to having players go out anyways, so I guess it's really not that big of a deal. They ended up getting Stephon Gilmore to replace Logan Ryan in the backfield. They got Brandon Cooks to help them with the weapon outside. Also picked up Coney Ely from the Panthers, Dwayne Allen as a tight end, I guess, to replace Martellus Bennett, and Mike Gillislee to replace LeGarrette Blount. So they pretty much replaced every position they lost. So, I mean, that's just how they do things. They're going to be good. Tom Brady is going to be there. It just doesn't matter. Is there anything bad about them? Not that I can find. I mean, I would say their running game isn't the best, but it's not like they've ever had a problem with that anyways because they pass the ball 45 times a game, so that doesn't really matter. They've got a solid defense, but I think their defense is probably the weakest part of their team. The offense looks fine. The defense has a couple of holes. Rob Ninkovich going away. Stephon Gilmore coming in is surely helpful. Losing Logan Ryan kind of sucks, though. But I don't really have much else to say about them. They're definitely going to win at least 13. I'd be surprised if they didn't. So let's move on to the AFC West. Honestly, one of the most difficult divisions, I think, for most of us to try and figure out what the order is going to be. I've seen several combinations. Most people have the Raiders or the Chiefs at the top, which makes sense. I'm going to start with the Broncos. Vegas has them at 8 wins. I don't think the Broncos are going to win 8 games this year. I just can't see it happening. That offense is one of the worst offenses in the league. The quarterback situation is terrible. The running back, we don't even know what's going to happen with the running backs. They have Jamal Charles now, but he injures himself pretty much every year. So there's no telling how many games he's going to play or what he's going to add to the team. They lost Russell Okung. They lost DeMarcus Ware to retirement. And, of course, Gary Kubiak's not there anymore, so they're going to have a new coach. Really, my main question for them is why would they get Jamal Charles? I don't understand what this adds to this team when they have C.J. Anderson anyways, and they know the risk of him getting hurt. I guess it's just because of another weapon because they know their quarterbacks are pretty weak. Of course, they have one of the best defenses still. They have probably the second or first best secondary in the NFL. I'd put them maybe a slight touch behind Seattle because it's Seattle. The defense can basically win them games alone. We saw that a lot last year. Their offense really doesn't have to do much because when their defense is pushing the other team back and they're getting field position around midfield, you only have to drive half the field. So their defense is good enough to win them games by themselves. I don't think it's going to win them 8 games this time. They lost a couple of pieces, and the division looks very, very strong this year. I think the Chargers are actually going to come third. I'm putting the Broncos 4th place in this division this time. That might sound a little surprising considering the Chargers' history recently, but I think the Broncos are finally going to fall off a cliff, and they're going to come last in the division this year. I'd peg them to win 7. 7-9 would be a good season to me, looking at their team overall. Of course, they still have good wideouts. Sanders and Thomas are still there, but if the quarterbacks are bad and they can't throw it to them, what does it matter? They have one of the worst offensive linemen in the game, Donald Stevenson. I don't remember if you guys remember or not, but when they played the Chiefs last year and fucking Lamar Houston ran over those guys, it was ugly. My mistake, not Lamar Houston, but Justin Houston. But anyways, he ran over this guy at least 5 times and sacked the quarterback. I mean, this Donald Stevenson is one of the worst offensive linemen in the game. The offensive line is not that good. And when you have bad quarterbacks and bad offensive line, well, I don't think I need to really explain that. That's just a terrible combination. So let's talk about the Chargers. They didn't really lose or gain too much. They lost Danny Woodhead, which I think is okay anyways, because, they've got a fine running back, as they do. They got Russell Okung to strengthen their line, which is a good addition for them. Let's see real quick here. Yep, their offensive line is going to get better. I don't think they really needed Woodhead because they have Melvin Gordon, and he's just fine for them anyways. Woodhead was just another weapon, but they'll be fine. The question with the Chargers every year is, are they going to be healthy? Because if you look at their team and you look at their offense, it's good on paper. It's just that the guys get hurt every single year. Keenan Allen is always hurt. Hell, they draft Mike Williams, and we don't even know if he's going to play a single game or not. The Chargers say he will, but I think I'm a little skeptical. They might give him season-ending surgery, and even if they don't, he may play a game or two and re-injure himself, and then he'll be out. So I'm not really expecting him to play much. But if they're healthy, the offense looks pretty scary. It's a very good 1-2 punch. Rivers is still good. They have one of the best linebacking cores in the league. Joey Bosa was amazing last year. He's going to be even better this year. They had a great draft, picked up a lot of pieces that they needed to fill. Honestly, they have a very underrated defensive unit, because if you look at the other defensive teams in the AFC, and at least in this division, if you compare them to the Broncos and the Chiefs, you think, well, the Chiefs have one of the best defenses in the league, and the Broncos have one of the best defenses too. But the Chargers actually have a very low-key good defense with Joey Bosa, Melvin Ingram, and Jatavis Brown in the linebacking core. Very strong. Pro Football Focus has the Chargers as the 8th most talented team in the league, which is higher than both the Broncos and I believe the Chiefs. I think the Chiefs are maybe around 10. So they look pretty good. They just have to stay healthy. That's just going to be the main thing. The only problems with their team that I see is that their offensive line, it's okay. The right side of their line may be a little bit weak. Their schedule is going to be brutal. I think they have the most difficult schedule in the league, but that happens when you have to play the Raiders, the Broncos, and the Chiefs twice. If they can split any number of those games, I think that'd be pretty impressive. Vegas has them at 7.5 wins. I'm going to take the over. I think they win at least 8. I wouldn't be surprised if they won 9, maybe even 10. It's honestly not a surprise to me. It might be to some people, but if that's a risk, then that's going to be my upset pick or whatever, to have the Chargers come at least 3rd in the division. So moving on to the Chiefs. They got Benny Logan to replace Dontari Poe, and they obviously lost Dontari Poe to the Falcons. Jamal Charles, Nile Davis, and Jeremy Maclin are all gone now. So they lost a good bit of weapons, which, in my opinion, may be the difference between them coming 2nd or 1st. They still have one of the best defenses in the league, top 3 for sure. They may have the best defense in the league from top to bottom, from the line to the secondary. That's obviously arguable, but Tyreek Hill should get a lot more playing time than he did last year. Everybody knows how good and quick he is now. I think he could potentially get pretty close to a 1,000-yard season. Honestly, some of the players they lost didn't even matter anyways, I guess. Losing Charles is probably fine for them. I mean, I'm going to miss him because I love watching him play. But when you have Spencer Ware and Charkandrick West, and they actually have a very deep running back core anyways, so you don't really need Charles. He was just hurting their cap space by getting hurt. They're going to be fine without him. Bad side is basically the same thing we've seen from the Chiefs pretty much every year for the past 4 years. They have weak wide receivers. Obviously they have Tyreek Hill, but the other guys are basically nobodies. Chris Conley and Albert Wilson, I hardly know the guys. They have Travis Kelce, which is going to help them, but when your only weapons are Kelce and Hill, your offense looks pretty weak. Personally, I don't see much improvement from last year. I think they may have the same amount of, basically the same season as last year as far as wins, maybe less. I don't see how they can improve with the players they lost, and they didn't really add too many players either. Vegas has them projected for 9. I think that's a pretty solid number. They can win 10. I think 10 is very achievable just because of how good their defense is. So I'm going to say they win around 10. I'll take the over there. Okay, finally, we have the Raiders. Obviously, they got Marshawn Lynch. It's a pretty big ad. They lost Latavius Murray, so they had to replace him. They're getting Jared Cook from the Packers, and they're getting Cordell Patterson from the Vikings. They lost Malcolm Smith, who, if you don't know, he was with the Seahawks the year before, joined the Raiders, now he's gone again. They have one of the best offensive lines in the league, top 3 for sure, and that's going to be a huge reason why they're going to play so well, is their offensive line was totally dominating last year. If Derek Carr can stay healthy, they're going to go to the playoffs again for sure. Even with Marshawn Lynch being old and out of practice, when you have an offensive line like that to run behind, all these guys are rated 80 or higher by Pro Football Focus, except for one guy, which is the right tackle. But all the other guys make up for it easily. Donald Penn and Kelechi Oslame, those two guys are some of the best left side linemen in the league. They're going to be fine. They're going to blow up huge running lanes like they did for Murray last year. Carr is going to get plenty of looks, plenty of time. So the secondary is much improved. Last year we know they had a pretty bad defense. They'd score 41 and their opponents would score 40. That's pretty much how the Raiders won their games. They won a ton of close games. But they did look to improve their secondary. They had a couple of draft picks. Their first-round draft pick, I believe, was a cornerback, and Garyon Conley. Don't quote me on that. Couple guys coming back from injury. They've got Reggie Nelson, Carl Joseph, Sean Smith on that secondary. And, of course, Khalil Mack is a beast. The only problem I see with them is that if Lynch is not good, then they're going to have a problem running the ball because the rest of their running backs are pretty much nobodies. I mean, some guy could come out of nowhere. That's totally possible, but not sure how likely it is. Honestly, their defense is lacking around Khalil Mack. The rest of their defensive line really isn't that good. They have Bruce Irvin, and he's a good complement to Mack. But with the rest of their defense, they're playing a 4-3, I believe. The rest of those guys around him are really not that great. So he's really going to get all the double teams, and it's going to be up to the other guys to fill in for that. Vegas has them at 9.5 wins. I'm taking the over easily. As long as Carr does not get hurt, I believe they're going to win at least 11. 10 or 11 at the most, or at the least. Okay, AFC North. We'll start with the Browns. Worst team in the division because they're the Browns. They got some good players. They got Kenny Britt from the Titans. J.C. Treader is a center. I cannot remember where he came from, but he's not bad. Kevin Zittler is a guard, so they really pumped up their offensive line this year. See. Obviously, they drafted the best player in the draft, Myles Garrett, to buff up the defensive line. Jabril Peppers should be a great addition to the team. I think he's pretty underrated, honestly, and he should do well on that team. The only guys they really lost, Terrell Pryor and Josh McCown. I mean, they drafted Kaiser anyway, so they don't really need McCown. Of course, they have Osweiler. And Terrell Pryor, that's a big loss for them, I think. But with as much as they built up anyways, I don't think they mind losing him. So good things about the Browns. They actually have a really good offensive line. None of their guys are ranked lower than 70, which 70 is average by Pro Football Focus. They have 4 guys rated over 83, and 1 guy is just average. So that's a very solid offensive line. With getting Treader and Zittler, that's a huge add. Obviously, Joe Thomas is still there. So that offensive line should be good. It should be good for the running backs to run behind. They had a great draft, obviously, with Myles Garrett, Jabril Peppers. Corral, Duke Johnson combo, I love it. I like those two guys together as a 1-2 punch. Kind of reminds me of Devonta Freeman and Coleman from Atlanta. And they have a great offensive line to do it behind. So I think it can definitely take the pressure off of whatever crappy quarterback situation they're going to have. The bad things about the Browns, obviously the quarterback question. I guess Cody Kessler is going to be the starter. My question is, how soon will Kaiser come in? I don't think it will take too long before he does. I'm going to say maybe 4 or 5 games. It just really depends on Kessler and how he's playing. They don't really have any good wide receivers. They lost Terrell Pryor, which was obviously their best one. We know Josh Gordon's probably not coming back. They did get Kenny Britt, and he's okay. He's average. Corey Coleman, we're going to see how good he's going to do. Let's see. The defense has a lot of rookies. I mean, that's to be expected from a team who's finished basically last for the past 5 years. They've got a lot of young guys on the defense that's going to hurt them. They're going to get burned, whatever. It's the Browns. I mean, they got to rebuild somehow. I don't think that they can come anything but last in the division, but it really just depends. I mean, I think they're definitely going to be last in the division. Vegas has them at 4.5 wins. Excuse me. I want to say the under here. I think they win 4, but that's also pretty generous. 2 or 3 is pretty likely. I don't think they win more than 4.5. I don't think they can win 5 games. Okay. Next 2 with the Bengals. It was really difficult for me to pick between the Bengals and the Ravens for 2nd and 3rd place. With the Bengals, they had a pretty good draft. John Ross from Washington looks to be a pretty good wide receiver. He's going to be opposite side of AJ Green, I believe. So that's going to be another weapon for Andy Dalton. Joe Mixon is a good running back. We know he has the problems, but this is the Bengals. This isn't anything new. Character concerns with the Bengals. Look at Vontaze Burfict. Look at Pac-Man Jones. They're on the defense. They get suspended and fined all the time. This is nothing new for the Bengals to tackle. I don't think Joe Mixon's character is going to be a problem, but you never know. I mean, if he's not, then he's going to be good. We know from what everybody said that he could be the best running back in the draft. It's just that his character concerns are going to be the problem. So if he does not get suspended or anything, the Bengals could have just picked up a huge addition. They also added Kevin Minter in the linebacker core. I think he came over from the Cardinals. They lost Carlos Dansby, Andrew Whitworth, and Kevin Zeitler. So they lost 2 offensive linemen. And that's a big deal because the Bengals have one of the worst offensive lines in football, which is not good for Joe Mixon and the rest of the running backs. It's not good for Andy Dalton. It's not going to give him a lot of time to use AJ Green and John Ross. It could be their downfall this year. Their defense is great. It's still good. They still have the same core that they've had with Vontaze Burfict, Adam Jones, Drake Kirkpatrick's still there, Carlos Dunlap and Geno Atkins on the front line. Their defense is fine. It's really just going to be up to whether or not their guys get suspended and whether or not the offensive line is going to do better than their ranking shows, because they have a bottom 10 offensive line this year. The Ravens, I mean, already I've had to edit this page that I've written down at least 6 times with the amount of injuries. I finished this probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, and Kenneth Dixon, Dennis Pitta, Crockett Gilmore, some other tight end I don't even know of, and then 2 other guys who either got suspended or injured. I mean, that's 7 players right there that are just out for the season or most of the season already. I don't even know. I mean, that's 3 tight ends. I don't know who's replacing these guys. Not that tight end is a super important position, but that's a lot of injuries regardless. And my actual question for them was, can they weather the injury storm this year? Because they've had some bad luck the past 2 years. I guess the answer is no. They got Jeremy Maclin and Danny Woodhead. Pretty good offensive weapons they added. Added Tony Jefferson and Brandon Carr to the defense. I like those too. They didn't really lose much. They lost an offensive tackle and Lawrence Guy on the defensive line. Not really that big of a deal, I think. They've got a good secondary. One of the better ones in the league, I think. Eric Weddle's there now. He was there last year, came over from San Diego. Tony Jefferson, as I said, he came in. He's really good. That's really the only thing I can really say about that defense, though. C.J. Mosley is a good linebacker. Obviously, Terrell Suggs. He's getting older and hurt more often, though, so I wouldn't really count on him too much. Honestly, holes in the offensive line. They've already had one offensive lineman hurt. Even though Marshall Yanda is the number one, here, by the way, Pro Football Focus rates Marshall Yanda the number one player in the league as on a play-by-play basis. So they have the best right guard and best player in football, according to Pro Football Focus, which is great if their right tackle and their left guard didn't suck. So, having one good guy, and then 2 or 3 bad guys doesn't really even it out. The running back field is just a total question mark now that Kenneth Dixon is out for the year. They don't really have that many weapons, I guess, to throw to now because half their tight ends are gone. They've got Jeremy Maclin and Rashad Perriman. And I think Mike Wallace is still there. So I guess those aren't too bad. I mean, the wide receivers are pretty good. It's just whether or not the offensive line is going to give Joe Flacco enough time to pass. Vegas has them at 9 wins. Yeah, I don't see it happening. Honestly, I think they win 7. 7 and 9 seems very likely to me. They seem to play better than their team gives on to, though, regardless of the fact that they have the 19th most talented team in the league, which is obviously below average. I can't see them winning 9 games. Honestly, between the Bengals and the Ravens, I don't know who's going to come second. They both have bad offensive lines. I like the Bengals' defense. I think the Bengals are going to come second in the division. I originally had the Ravens second, but after all the injuries and seeing exactly who they lost, I don't think that's true anymore. So I'm going to have the Ravens third and the Bengals second. Finally, we have the Steelers, which they have the 5th most talented team in the league, up and down. They didn't really do much in the offseason. They added Niles Davis from KC. They lost Lawrence Timmons out of the linebacker core, but that's okay. Their linebackers are fine anyways. They have Ryan Shazier, James Harrison still there. It's fine. They have one of the best offensive lines in the league. Top 3. Every guy's rated over 80, which is unbelievable. I think there's only 2 teams in the league. There's only 2 teams in the league that have an offensive line where every single player is rated over 80, and that's the Tennessee Titans and the Pittsburgh Steelers. So that's really incredible. On paper, their defense seems better than last year. They didn't have a great defense last year. At least they're running. I think it was the running defense that was pretty bad. Or maybe I'm thinking of it wrong, but Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell could be the best 1-2 punch in the league. It's just obviously, can Le'Veon Bell stay healthy? Will Le'Veon Bell even play every game this year? Will he even be with the Steelers next year? That's the question. The way that they're talking, I don't even think he's going to be playing for Pittsburgh after the season. But there's really not much to say. They're a good team. They just have to be healthy. We've seen the past couple of years, they are very good when they're healthy. But Le'Veon Bell gets injured. Big Ben gets injured. They've had some injuries on the offensive line or the defensive side, and it just completely tears their team apart. But if they're healthy, they're obviously an easy pick for the playoffs. Vegas has them at 10.5. I think that's easily achievable. They'll probably win 12 or more. If I had to take a guess. they're going to win the division easily because the Bengals and Ravens have problems right now. But if they're going to beat other big teams on their schedule, like the Patriots, like the Raiders, they're going to have to be healthy and play at their best, because we did see that they couldn't exactly beat some of those better teams last year. Okay, the AFC South. I'm going to start with the Jaguars. I think they're the worst team in the division. I'm sick and tired of thinking the Jaguars will be good when they suck. I'm so tired. They have a good team. I promise they do. They just don't ever play like they have a good team. I'm going to blame coaching. Blake Bortles, will he suck again? How much was the offensive line and coaching the problem last year is what we're going to find out, because they did change up their offensive line. Come here. They did change up their offensive line a little bit, and they're going to have a new coach. Honestly, they had some of the biggest off-season additions of any team in the league, in my opinion. They got A.J. Bouye. I believe he came over from the Texans. He's one of the best DBs in the league. Calais Campbell, I believe, was the top-rated defensive player last year of all defensive players. One of the best defensive linemen easily. They got Barry Church. I think he came from the Chiefs. He's a safety. He's also rated over 85 by Pro Football Focus. And the draft was great. I mean, they got D.D. Westbrook from Oklahoma as a new wide receiver, and they got Leonard Fournette. And to me, it's going to be between Leonard Fournette and Christian McCaffrey for the Offensive Rookie of the Year. I think it's going to be one of those guys. I think McCaffrey's going to have a better chance because the Panthers are a better team and their offensive line is better. But if Fournette runs like he did in college, he could easily win it. They really didn't lose anything. They lost Prince Amukamara and Jonathan Cyprien. Both of those guys were in their backfield, but they got A.J. Bouye and Barry Church to replace them. So, honestly, they traded two good guys for two even better guys. So, they're fine. Their defense looks good on paper. They have a very good secondary, a good linebacker core, and with Malik Jackson, Calais Campbell, and Dante Fowler on the defensive line, that's a very good combination. Fournette, Ivory, and Yeldon as a three-headed dragon in the backfield looks pretty solid. And, of course, they've got the Allen Bros with Allen Robinson and Allen Hurns, plus D.D. Westbrook on the outside. Now, the question here is, Bortles was the problem. He threw way too many interceptions. Whether or not that has to do with play calling or Blake Bortles playing badly or his offensive line sucking, which it did. It was terrible last year. I believe he was sacked more times than any quarterback in the league. If he could just play good for once, they should score. They have guys that can score. I'm so tired of thinking the Jaguars, it's going to be their year. They've got the players, but I just can't put them in anything but fourth. This will probably be the year they decide to win or whatever. Their pass rushers are a little weak, and honestly, the weakest thing about the Jaguars is they're the Jaguars. They're going to disappoint everybody somehow. Vegas has them at 6.5. I thought they would win 9 games last year, and they didn't come close. So I'm going to take the under because it's the safe pick, and some of the teams in the division are a lot stronger than they are. I'm sick of thinking the Jaguars are going to do well, so this year I'm not going to buy that. Going on to the Colts, they got Malik Hooker in the draft from Ohio State, which should hopefully help one of the worst secondaries in the league last year. They had a terrible defense, and hopefully he'll be a good add for them. Christine Michael in the backfield to play alongside Frank Gore is good, and honestly, they lost nobody. They did not really lose any notable players from their team. The secondary should improve, obviously, with Malik Hooker. Other than that, the Colts seem like a very mediocre average team to me. If Andrew Luck isn't healthy, they're going to be worse. He has to be healthy, and there's already questions that he's not playing any preseason games, or if he'll even be healthy for the first game of the season. The offensive line still has not seen any improvement, which makes 0 sense to me. They had a terrible offensive line. They could have drafted guys in the draft and didn't do it. They did not draft a single offensive lineman. Explain that. It makes zero sense. I just don't get it. They got a bunch of rookies on defense. They're going to get burned by probably the Jaguars, honestly. Which I think they probably have the best wide receivers in the division. Titans might be second. But their defense still sucks. They're just not going to win the games that they should win because their defense is bad. Vegas has them at 8.5 wins. I don't think they win 8.5. Even if they have Andrew Luck for 16 games, he doesn't have enough weapons around him. I mean, T.Y. Hilton and Dante Moncrief are pretty good. Frank Gore's good too, but when you have an offensive line that doesn't do much and your defense sucks, I mean, what are you going to do? I don't think they can win 8.5. I think 8-8 is achievable here. 7-9 wouldn't surprise me. If they win more than 9 or 9, I'd be a little shocked, honestly. The Texans are next. They got Deshaun Watson. That's really the only guy they added. They didn't really add anybody else from the draft or the offseason. Lost A.J. Bouye on the defense and Brock Osweiler. That's a loss. And I say that because he's not there anymore, but it's not really a loss. Again, they have one of the best defensive units in the league. J.J. Watt is coming back. Hopefully he will be healthy because he is fun to watch. J.J. Watt, Brian Cushing, Ladavian Clowney, and Whitney Merciless is not a fair front 5 players. It's just not cool. Front 4, whatever. Losing A.J. Bouye hurts their secondary, so that could make a difference this time. But with the pressure they have on the defensive line, it doesn't matter as much most of the time. Will Fuller broke his collarbone, which is something I added on here late. I feel like that's kind of a big deal because DeAndre Hopkins is really the only weapon they have now. Braxton Miller's out there. He's okay, but I really thought Hopkins and Fuller could be one of the best wide receiver duos. And if Fuller's out for the season, then or for an extended period of time, I guess that's not the case anymore. Unfortunately, they have one of the worst offensive lines in the league. They have the 29th out of 32 ranked offensive line, which does not bode well for a team that's running the quarterbacks that they're running with Tom Savage, rookie Deshaun Watson. Lamar Miller can try and run behind it if he wants to, but I don't know how much that's going to do. The defense is just going to bail them out like they always do, but I don't think they're going to be able to bail them out every single time. They keep making the playoffs because of their defense and because the rest of the division is garbage. The rest of the division is not garbage this time because the Titans are going to win the division. I mark my words, the Titans will win the division this year. Vegas has the Texans winning 8 games. Personally, I don't see it, but I say this every single year. The past 3 years, I have picked a different team over the Texans. I think I picked the Colts once or twice and the Jaguars once. In both times, all 3 times the Texans won. So they proved me wrong every single year. But this time, they're not going to. I'm going to have them come second. I think 8 wins is good. I'm thinking 8-8, maybe 9-7. Really, it's between them and the Colts for second place. If Andrew Luck's hurt, it's going to be the Texans. If he plays, it'll be a lot closer. But I think they're a pretty solid pick for second place this year. Finally, the Titans. They got Corey Davis in the draft. They picked up Jonathan Cyprien from the Jaguars, who's a great safety. They got Logan Ryan in the backfield, who came over from New England. The only guys they lost were Chance Warmack, which is a guard on the offensive line, and Kendall Wright as a wide receiver. Losing Kendall Wright doesn't matter because they got Corey Davis, so that's a wash. I mean, I know Corey Davis is a rookie, but he's one of the top-rated draftees for the wide receiver spot. He should be fine. Mariota's finally got some weapons. According to Pro Football Focus, the Titans have the number 3 most talented starting team in the league. behind only Atlanta and New England. And we're talking about the two teams that went to the Super Bowl last year, and they're right behind them. That's pretty good. Of course, this is all on paper, and they're going to actually have to play like it, but that's still very highly rated. They only have 2 guys that are rated worse than 55. Everybody else is 70 or better. Actually, everyone else is 75 or better, which is incredible. They have one of the best offensive lines in the league. Like I said earlier, only them and the Raiders have every single player rated 80 or higher, which is almost unheard of. Their secondary got a lot better. It wasn't that great last year, but with Jonathan Cyprien and Logan Ryan coming in, that's going to wash up really quickly. DeMarco Murray should have a fantastic year behind that offensive line as long as they're healthy and he's healthy. Easily 1,000-yard season. I see no reason why he wouldn't run for over 1,000. I'd say even 1,200 or 1,300 is easily achievable. Mariota is going to be even better. He's had more experience. He's got some rookie wideouts, which is a little concerning, but he likes to throw to Delaney Walker a lot, and they still have Rashard Matthews, who's been there for a bit. So they're going to be okay on the offense. But I can't really find anything wrong with the Titans. On paper, they look like one of the best teams in the league. It's just whether or not they play like it. The only thing I can see wrong with them is that their wide receivers are young, and they could drop balls a lot, miss run routes, cause interceptions, that kind of thing. But they look pretty good. Vegas has them at 8.5 wins. I think that's easily an over. I think they win 10 or more. This isn't a very strong division. Texans are on the downslope to me. Colts, really not that good. And the Jaguars are the Jaguars. I mean, that's just how it is. The Titans should do pretty fine this year. Okay, I'm already at 46 minutes, and I'm just now starting the NFC, so I apologize. But I'm just going to keep going and lump this into one video. So I'm going to start with the NFC East, which I'm sure everybody would agree that this is the most difficult division to predict. I think maybe only the NFC West was this hard, but this is really a clusterfuck. I mean, we'll start with the Eagles because I think the consensus is that the Eagles is the worst team, but I'm going to try and convince everybody that they're not as bad as everybody thinks they are. I haven't heard anybody talk about the Eagles. I would like people to remember that last year the Eagles started off very hot. I'm pretty sure they were 5-0 last year through 5 games. I don't know. That's right. They won their first 3 games. They beat Pittsburgh. They whooped Pittsburgh's ass 34-3. And then it was downhill from there. They have the #1 offensive line in the league per Pro Football Focus. That's a very good thing for them. Because honestly, Wentz wasn't even that bad. If you think about those first 3 games, and even the game they lost, they beat Cleveland, Chicago, and Pittsburgh. Only one of those was good. Went on a bye, lost at Detroit by 1, lost to Washington by 7. And even in those games, Wentz didn't even play that badly. I don't think Wentz is even the problem. They lost a lot of close games last year. Some of them weren't close later on, but most of them were close games. They got LeGarrette Blount, who's going to be behind the best offensive line in the league. Obviously, their running game is fine. They've got Ryan Matthews. He just needs to be healthy, which, I mean, Ryan Matthews gets hurt a lot, so that's kind of a problem. But they added Alshon Jeffrey, signed Torrey Smith kind of late, and they got Chance Warmack from the Titans, Derek Bennett in the draft for the defense, Chris Long on the defense, and Ronald Darby, who they just got in the trade from the Bills. The only guys they lost were Connor Barwin, which is a little surprising to me. I thought they'd keep him. He's one of their best defensive players. Benny Logan and Nolan Carroll and Jordan Matthews. All of those guys were on the defense except for Jordan Matthews. So, I mean, they had one of the better defenses last year, whether people want to admit it or not. They lost a decent chunk of that defense, which could be the problem for them. But their front seven is very good. Their front seven on their defense is good. With they just drafted Derek Barnett, looks to be very solid. Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox, Jordan Hicks, Michael Kendricks, all those guys, very solid players. The problem may be the secondary, where they're a little bit weaker. Only Malcolm Jenkins is really their best player back there. Personally, I think LeGarrette Blount and Ryan Matthews is a fun combination. You got Ryan Matthews, who's a tiny, quick guy, and you got Blount, who's going to come in on third down and pound the rock. That'll be nice to take the pressure off Wentz a little bit. Wentz has some weapons now with Alshon Jeffrey being there. I know Jordan Matthews is gone, so he's not going to be their wide receiver 2 anymore. I guess it's going to be Torrey Smith, even though he's old now. But it's really whether or not Wentz plays better. He had a mediocre season. I wouldn't say it was a bad season. It's just that he was a rookie. You can't really expect him to do that much. But if he plays better, and behind this offensive line and the running game, they may surprise some people. The problem with them is their secondary is a little bit weak. And if you look at the other teams in this division, you've got Terrell Pryor, you have Des Bryant, you have OBJ, you have Brandon Marshall. I mean, you could see the Eagles' secondary get torched by some of the best wide receivers in the league, and that may be their downfall there. Rest of the team looks fine, though. Vegas has them at 8 wins. I think they can win 8 games, but they're going to have to beat the non-division opponents. They may split with the Redskins. They may catch one against the Cowboys or the Giants. I mean, these division games are always really tight anyways. The problem with them is that the teams in the division are just better than them. The Cowboys, despite the losses, despite how much we don't like them, still a good team. Redskins got way better. Giants got way better. The Eagles got way better. I just think the other teams are better. That's just what it comes down to. If they win less than 8, that's fine. I think 7 and 9 could happen just because the division's that good. If they win 8 or more, that wouldn't surprise me, though. The division's just really difficult for me to predict. We'll go to the Cowboys next. Obviously, we know about Ezekiel's suspension, 6 games. That could get overturned or at least changed to less. We don't know yet. They lost Nolan Carroll in the back and the defensive backfield and Taco Charlton. Oh, I'm sorry. My bad. They got Nolan Carroll and they drafted Taco Charlton. They lost Brandon Carr, Barry Church, Ronald Leary, and Maurice Claiborne. All of those defensive guys, all of them in the defensive backfield, except Ronald Leary, who was on their offensive line. The offensive line, honestly, it took a little bit of a hit. Losing Ronald Leary, and I forget there was one other guy that left. Their offensive line is not going to be as dominant as they were last year. People think that anybody can just run behind that offensive line, but it's not going to be the same 5 guys. They have the best center in the league in Travis Frederick, and Tyrone Smith is a great left tackle. Elliott is still going to run, and whoever else is running is still going to run because their offensive line is still good. But I don't think it'll be as nearly as dominant as it was last year. Their defense got a lot worse. Losing those 3 guys in the defensive backfield is definitely going to hurt them. Their defensive line doesn't look threatening at all. They're probably going to have some problems putting pressure on the ball, unless Taco Charlton is as good as they think he's going to be. But in his rookie season, I don't see it. Honestly, the other teams in the division just improved way more than they did. The Redskins, Giants, and Eagles all got better players in the draft and better players in free agency than they did. And that could be a difference because last year, all 3 of these teams did not have as strong of a lineup as they do now. They all got better. Their offense is still pretty good, though. I mean, it's just whether or not Elliott and Dak Prescott, whether they regress or not. But I think that they're definitely going to regress from the the win total they had last year. The Vegas has them at 9.5. I think that's a pretty fair number, honestly. 9-7 or 10-6 is about where I'd peg them this time. I don't think they're going to win nearly as many as last year. The Redskins, the Vegas has the Redskins at 7.5 wins. I feel like that's a little bit low. I don't really think they're that bad. They got a lot of additions this offseason. Zach Brown, Terrell McClain, DJ Swearinger, and Jonathan Allen in the draft, all on the defensive side. All of those really good ads. Obviously, they got Terrell Pryor as another weapon for, wow, I can't think of his name, Kirk Cousins to throw to. They did lose Garcon and Jackson. I don't think that's too big of a deal, but those were their two best offensive players, so we'll just have to see. Pryor should be fine. He's going to be really good. And it's up to Josh Jackson, with who they drafted last year. I think he was a rookie last year, and he didn't really play that much because he was hurt. So their wideouts could be a little bit weaker. I don't like their running back core very much. Personally, I think the offense is the weakest part of their game. Other than Jordan Reed, who's always hurt, when he gets hurt again, they're going to have problems. You can't just rely on Terrell Pryor to do everything. That's not how it's going to work. And their running back game really isn't that great. It's probably going to be by committee if I had to take a guess. Offensive line looks pretty good, though. Trent Williams is one of the best left tackles in the league, so Kirk Cousins is going to be safe on that left side. His right tackle, Morgan Moses, looks pretty good, too. He's rated over 85. So, yeah, my only problems with them is that their wide receivers and running backs are young/thin. They're very thin at those positions. Defensive line looks like their weakest part of their defense. But the secondary did get a lot better with DJ Swearinger coming in. 7.5 wins. I think they can beat that. That seems a little low to me. I'd go for 9 or 10 wins here. I think they'll vie for the top place in the division along with the Giants, but I think the Giants are going to win the division this year. Spoiler alert. So I'll go ahead and talk about the Giants. They added Sean Drawn to the running back core. Obviously got Brandon Marshall, which is huge. Evan Ingram in the draft as a tight end. I think they said he's the best tight end out of the draft. So that's another weapon for Eli to throw to. And they lost Jonathan Hankins on the defensive line. Not really too big of a deal when you have Jason Pierre-Paul, Oliver Vernon, Damon Harrison. They're going to be fine losing him anyways. Best part of that team is that deep wide receiver core. Brandon Marshall, Odell Beckham, Sterling Shepard, and even the guys behind them, all solid. Their defensive line is one of the best in the league. They're going to constantly put pressure on some of the weaker ones. The only problem here is that the offensive lines in this division are very good. They're going to put pressure on all the other teams, though. Have a really good secondary. We know Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie is one of the best defensive backs, and Janoris Jenkins is pretty damn good, too. Landon Collins, one of the best safeties in the league. So they're going to definitely be able to cover some of these wide receivers in the division. Only thing I see about them is they have not had a running game in forever. I think they placed last the last 2 years in rushing yards, total rushing yards, and rushing yards per game. So they just have not been able to run the ball at all. And with the way they added to their wide receiver core, we can easily see Eli passing 50 times a game. It's definitely not with out of reach here. Honestly, their tackles are bad, and that's not good for Eli Manning. And he got sacked a ton last year. The left tackle and the right tackle both rated under 50, and that could definitely cause some problems in a division where there's some pretty good defensive rushers. So maybe the passing game won't be as dominant as people think. If Eli doesn't have time to throw it to Beckham and Marshall, they're not going to produce like people think they will. They got a rookie kicker now as well, I might add. Vegas has them at 8.5 wins. I think they'll beat that just because of how good their defense is and because of their wide receivers. I think they'll win the division. I just don't know by how much. It's probably going to be super close. It's definitely going to be a 2-team race, possibly a 3-team race, and it could even be all 4 teams very close to each other. They could be beating each other up in this division and make it very interesting. NFC West. We'll start with the 49ers. I don't have too much to say about them. Vegas has them for 5 wins. They're not going to win 5 wins. They're not going to win 5 games. It's not happening. I think the Rams, they swept the Rams last year, and that was their wins. That's gross. They got some guys. Solomon Thomas in the draft looks pretty good as a pass rusher. Pierre Garçon came in from the Redskins. They got Brian Hoyer. They got Malcolm Smith. They lost Antoine Bethea, and they lost Torrey Smith. So they're in rebuilding mode. I don't have too much to say here. They've got pretty good wide receivers with Garçon. And what's his face? Garçon and Aldrick Robertson and Jeremy Curley. That's not bad. Overall offense really isn't that bad. It's just their offensive line is garbage. If they didn't have Joe Staley or Jeremy Zuta, their offensive line would be terrible. Because 3 of their guys are rated under 55, and they're going to get sacked pretty much all year, especially by the Seahawks and the Cardinals. And I'm sure Aaron Donald will have a field day against this 49ers offensive line. By the way, fuck Kyle Shanahan. I just had to get that out of the way here. We're moving on to the Rams now. Vegas has them for 6 wins. They're not winning 6. Their team is bad. I know some of you are picking the Rams to come second in this division. I'm telling you right now, it's not happening. They have the 31st ranked team by Pro Football Focus, talent-wise. They are only behind the Jets. I mean, the Jets are only behind them. So they have the 2nd worst team in the league as far as total overall players. There's no way that they're going to come second in this division. I doubt they'll win 4 games. They may win 3. That's like as high as I'm going. Goff looked awful last year. I mean, the rest of his team's awful, so that's probably part of it. Really, their offensive line isn't that bad. That's not even their problem. It's just everything else. They don't have that many weapons. They've got Tavon Austin, who gets hurt. Todd Gurley just couldn't run last year because everybody figured if they stacked the box, they weren't going to win games. So they stacked the box, and Todd Gurley sucked. I'd force Jared Goff to throw the football too. They got Sammy Watkins. I don't think that's much of an ad because he's just going to get hurt again. If he plays more than 10 games, I would be surprised. I just don't see a lot of there's not much to talk about here. Aaron Donald is one of the best players in the league, if not the best defensive player in the league, along with J.J. Watt. But he's not going to be able to win them games by himself. That's not going to happen. They're going to be 3rd for sure. Hell, they could even potentially battle for 4th with the 49ers, but they're not going to do much. The Cardinals. How much will they improve from last year? That's the question. They got better. They definitely got a lot of players in. They did lose a good bit of players. They got Antoine Bethea and Carlos Dansby on the defense after losing Calais Campbell, Tony Jefferson, Kevin Minter, and DJ Swearinger. So they lost 4 defensive players and gained 2 that are about equal value. So they lost more than they got. However, there's no way they come worse than 2nd. They could even potentially fight the Seahawks, but I'm not going to really talk about that because I don't think it'll happen. David Johnson could be the best running back in the league. I would argue that if he produces like he did last year, he could be better than Bell simply because David Johnson actually plays football games and doesn't get hurt. The rest of the offense is still there. I mean, Larry Fitzgerald is there, John Brown, J.J. Nelson. They really just need Carson Palmer to play better. He's freaking old now. I don't think he's going to play beyond this season. I think this will be his last season playing, personally. So they're going to have to find a replacement for him soon. Their offensive line isn't amazing, but it's not bad. So it's good enough to get the job done in this division, I think. Lost a lot of defensive players, though. They went from a great unit to just a good unit. They still have Patrick Peterson, Tyrann Mathieu, and they got Antoine Bethea. Still have Chandler Jones, but it's not going to be as dominant as it was. Vegas has them at 8 wins. I think 8-8 is fine. I can see them coming 8-8 or even 9-7. They may steal one from the Seahawks this year. All right, so to the Seahawks. They got Eddie Lacy, and they got Blair Walsh, which is hilarious to me, considering Blair Walsh put them through in that playoff game not too long ago. Oh, sorry about that. They lost Stephen Hauschka and John Jenkins. They didn't really lose anything. We already know, I mean, we talk about the Seahawks all the time, me and my group. We know what's good about them. We know what's bad about them. So they didn't lose many players. They got a power runner like they like in Lacy. I'm not saying Lacy's good. I'm just saying he fits the type of running game that Marshawn Lynch kind of ran. And this is the kind of football that they want to run. You could tell they weren't comfortable having Russell Wilson throw it as much as he did last year. And, of course, he had some injury problems. The passing game is not how they want to play football. So I think picking up Eddie Lacy is an attempt to try and get back to that power running game and just rock'em, sock'em, smash mouth football that the Seahawks were used to playing a couple of years ago when they went to the back-to-back Super Bowls. Their receiving core is still good. Jimmy Graham is good. Jermaine Kearse, Doug Baldwin, they're not flashy, but they get the job done. And, of course, their defense is still one of the best in the league. Top 5 easily. I'd argue it's the best defense, but there's a lot of good defenses this year, actually. Problems. They have one of the most atrocious offensive lines I've ever seen. Pro Football Focus has them as the worst offensive line in football. That's not good. Russell Wilson was already having injury problems last year. This is not going to help. They had the whole entire draft to draft offensive linemen, and this is how many they drafted. 0. They didn't pick anyone up in free agency to add to the line. They didn't draft a single offensive lineman. I just don't understand why. It makes no sense to me. I mean, that's literally the weakest part of their team. It's going to make them lose games. You saw how many times Russell Wilson got sacked last year, how many times he was under pressure and running around. Half the reason he hurt himself was because he was rushing out of the pocket so many times last year. I mean, they lost a lot of games just because of that. They just could not settle into their offense the entire year. They're going to make the playoffs because they're the best team in the division, but they're not going to be able to beat the better teams. They're not going to be able to beat the Packers. They're not going to be able to beat the Falcons. They're probably not going to beat the Cowboys, honestly. I mean, better teams are going to beat the Seahawks. That's just the reality of it. Vegas has them at 10.5 wins. I think that's achievable despite the offensive line problems. Their defense wins them games. They're like the Broncos. When you have Richard Sherman, Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor, Bobby Wagner, KJ Wright, Michael Bennett, Frank Clark, Cliff Averill, I mean, we all know these guys because they've been there. And you hear their name every single week. Their defense is good enough to win them games. So they're going to win over 10.5. I think I can see them winning 11. If they win 10, okay. That's realistic to me, too. They're still going to win the division and go to the playoffs. Okay, NFC North. We'll start with the Bears because they're the weakest team. They're really not as bad as people think they are. It's just that they're young, and they had tons and tons of injuries. They were the most injured team last year, statistically. They had the most adjusted games lost due to injury since 2000. So in 17 years, they lost more games than anybody due to injury. Don't ask me how those statistics work. I just looked it up, found a thing on that. But anyways, they had so many defensive players hurt last year, an unbelievable number. Let's see if I can find that. Kyle Fuller missed half the season. Lamar Houston missed almost the whole season. Eddie Goldman, Danny Trevathan, and Pernell McPhee, all of them got hurt. That doesn't even count Kevin White. They just had tons of injuries last year that hurt them. They're going to bounce back for sure. I don't think they'll be as bad as last year. That being said, they picked up good free agency pieces. They got Prince Amukamara from the Jaguars, Quentin Demps as a safety. So their defense that was already good, but was just injured, got better. This is Bears football. They want to have a good defense. That's what the Bears are known for. They kind of got away from that past several years, but they're going to be back in it this year. They got Mike Glennon and, of course, Mitch Trubisky. I don't know how soon we'll see Trubisky because I don't really think Glennon's that bad, but it's more of an insurance policy than anything, I think. Kendall Wright to replace Alshon Jeffrey, which really he's not replacing him. He's just trying to make up for it. They lost Brian Hoyer and Alshon Jeffrey, but they got Mike Glennon to replace Hoyer. I think losing Jeffrey is kind of a big deal just because Kevin White's been hurt. He has not done anything. He just hasn't produced like they thought he would, but he's been more injured than they thought, too. The defense looks good in pretty much every area of the game. Their secondary looks good with Amukamara. Kyle Fuller's coming back off of injury. Quentin Demps is there now. Linebackers, you got Pernell McPhee, who was injured last year, Jarrell Freeman, and Danny Trevathan. And the defensive line looks pretty good, too. So the defense should definitely compete with the teams in here. The problems they have are the wide receiver core needs to be better. Kevin White, Kendall Wright, and Cameron Meredith doesn't sound that great. It just doesn't. Their offense just isn't threatening. It's like if I was playing defense against the Bears, I wouldn't be scared. The only guy that really scares me is Jordan Howard. But if other defenses were smart, they'd stack the box. Make Mike Glennon throw it. Or if it's Trubisky, make him throw it. It just doesn't look that threatening to me. Their offensive tackles gave up a lot of pressure last year. A lot of sacks. They didn't really do that great. But their offensive line doesn't look too bad aside from that. They have one of the least experienced offensive lines in the league. Or, not offensive lines. Just one of the youngest offenses in the league with their just overall. Vegas has them at 5.5 wins. Honestly, I could see them winning 6. I don't know who they'd win against, but I can see 6 wins. But it really just depends on if they play to their potential and they stay healthy. If they have an injury-prone season like last year, they're not going to win 6. But 6 is the number I'm going to peg them at least right now. Sorry for all the little pause breaks. I got to clear my throat every once in a while. Let's see. We left off with the Bears. We'll go to the Lions next. I don't really like the Lions team this year. They got some good additions. TJ Lang stolen from the Packers. Ricky Wagner, an offensive lineman. So their offensive line got a lot better. They got DJ Hayden and Paul Warlow to add to the defense. They lost a tackle and a guard and replaced it with Lang and Wagner, so that's pretty much a wash. They lost 2 offensive linemen, got 2 offensive linemen. But the ones that they got were better. So, honestly, their offensive line has been their problem for a while now. So with that getting better, it's going to make Stafford have a little bit more time to throw the ball. The running back core that they have with Theo Riddick and Abmer Abdullah is still there. They just need to stay healthy. The secondary, very strong. Every guy rated above 80. Darius Slay, Nevin Lawson, Glover Quinn, Tavon Wilson, all great. So, sad part is the rest of their defense doesn't really get even close to that. Their linebackers have been weak for a while now. They don't really look to be any better. Ezekiel Anza is their best defensive lineman who provides some pressure, but the rest is not that threatening. Matt Stafford's a great quarterback. I just don't think he's got the weapons that he needs to play at a high level. I mean, let me rephrase that. He's going to play at a high level. It's just the team isn't going to produce as much as if they really miss Megatron. Vegas has him at 7.5. Honestly, I think they'll be fighting with the Bears for 3rd and 4th place. I think they go 7 and 9. It's like a number that I've got in my head. I don't think they're going to beat the Vikings out for 2nd. So we'll move on to the Vikings. They got some stuff. Michael Floyd, I think he's in trouble though, so I don't know if he's going to play very much. I think he's suspended. Can't really remember, honestly. I don't have that in my notes. They got Latavius Murray, pretty big ad considering they lost Adrian Peterson. They needed a good, solid running back. I think he definitely is the guy for them. They got 2 new offensive tackles because they also lost some offensive tackles. And they drafted Dalvin Cook. So with Dalvin Cook and Latavius Murray, that's a pretty good looking backfield right there. I like it. Obviously, they lost Adrian Peterson and they lost Cordell Patterson. Either one, not really that big of a deal to me. I don't think losing AP is a big deal when you gain Latavius Murray. AP's not what he used to be. He's still good, but I think they'll be fine without him. So their free agent signings and their draft was pretty solid, in my opinion. The wide receivers they have around them, not too bad. Laquan Treadwell from Ole Miss, I think they drafted him last year. He's going to be better this year, I think. Bradford loves throwing to Kyle Rudolph. He's one of the better tight ends in the league. Stephon Diggs, still really good. Adam Thielen's actually rated above 80. So the guys he's got to pass to are pretty good. Very strong secondary with Terrence Newman, Harrison Smith, Xavier Rhodes. Looks good. Defense overall just looks good. Eric Kendricks, Anthony Barr, Linval Joseph on the defensive line. I like their defense a lot. They've had a pretty quiet offseason for the most part. Well, I guess it's not too quiet. They've added some pretty good guys. They're not a flashy team. They're just kind of a rough and tumble team. I think they could compete with the Packers if the Packers have the problems that they had last year, which is injuries and crap defense. But ultimately, I think that the Vikings have a pretty decent shot at making the wild card. Vegas has them at 8.5 wins. I think they could beat that. 10 plus is what I'm thinking. 9 and 7 wouldn't surprise me, but I can see them being a 10-win team here. Oh, and the Packers. So they add Martellus Bennett and Davon House, who's a DB. They lost a lot of players, though. A lot of players. They lost Micah Hyde, Dayton Jones, Julius Peppers, all those guys on the defensive side. On the offensive side, they lost J.C. Treader as a center, Eddie Lacy, and Jared Cook. So the guys they lost are absolutely don't make up for the guys they gained. I guess Martellus Bennett over Jared Cook, that's an improvement. I'll take that. They had one of the best offensive lines last year, where all the guys last year were rated over 80. Now that they lost J.C. Treader and T.J. Lang, that's not the case anymore. It's still going to be a good offensive line. David Bakhtiari is one of the best left tackles, and Ryan Beluga is one of the best right tackles. So it's still going to be solid. It's just not going to be quite as dominant. They had a lot of injuries last year that didn't help them out either. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers, along with Tom Brady, the best quarterbacks in the league. Doesn't matter who his wide receivers are, he's going to get his passes. Jordy Nelson's back. Devontae Adams, Randall Cobb. Now Martellus Bennett is a huge target to throw to. The problems here that I see are the same ones as last year. The running game is non-existent. Ty Montgomery is not going to do anything for them. He's just not. I'm going to have to check who's behind him because I honestly don't even know who's behind Ty Montgomery. They have a bunch of rookies. In fact, every single running back they have behind Ty Montgomery is a rookie. I kid you not. That's actually hilarious. They've got Aaron Ripkowski. I mean, they hand it to Ripkowski sometimes out of the fullback position, but Rodgers will be passing at 50-plus a game. They're going to have to figure out how to run the football. You cannot be one-dimensional. You can try, but unless you're the New England Patriots, you cannot be one-dimensional. Defense really doesn't look any better to me. I know they had injuries last year with HaHa Clinton-Dix, and just a lot of injuries did not help them. But regardless of injuries or not, this defense is not good. They are going to get torched by the better teams in the league. I can see the Cowboys running over the defensive line, despite the fact that they had a good running defense last year. It actually was pretty solid. Pass defense, god-awful, though. I mean, the Falcons absolutely torched them, among other teams who torched them. But despite all that, they're going to win the division. Vegas has them at 10.5. I think they'll win more than that. I'd be surprised if they didn't. They're at least an 11-win team, despite the defensive problems and the running back problems. It's the Packers. There's just some teams that play well regardless of their problems. The Packers are one of them. Okay, last division, NFC South. Got to save the best for last. We're going to start with the Aints, who added Adrian Peterson. Obviously, it's a little bit interesting to me that they get AP, though, when you have Mark Ingram back there still already. I guess they're going for a two-headed thing. Are they going to make AP the starter, or is Ingram the starter? I'm not really totally sure here. They lost Brandon Cooks and Jari Evans, who is an offensive lineman. But despite that, the Saints still have a very good offensive line. They've had one of the best, most consistent offensive lines in the league for a number of years now. That's part of the reason Drew Brees is able to throw for 5,000 a year consistently. So the offensive line is fine. They drafted Marshawn Lattimore as a DB from Ohio State. Well, God knows they needed him because in this fucking division with the wide receivers that the Panthers, Bucks, and Falcons have, they need a secondary. And their defense, as we know, has been one of the worst in the league for several years now. They are running one of the most rookie defenses in the league. They have at least 5 projected rookie starters. It kind of reminds me of Atlanta last year where they had a ton of rookies to start. I don't see it being a good year for them just because of their defense is very bad, at least on paper. But with Adrian Peterson, Mark Ingram, and John Kuhn in the running back core, as well as Drew Brees being Drew Brees, and being able to throw it to anybody, the offense is scary. It's always scary. I just think they're in one of the better divisions in football, and their team is just not up to par with the rest of the teams in this division. In fact, the NFC South is the only division where every team is projected to win 8 or more games by Vegas. So the Aints are projected to win 8 on the dot. I don't think they go 8-8 here. They're not going to win more than 7. I think they've come 7-9 3 straight years now. Let's go with 7-9 again. Seems realistic to me. Next, we'll go to the Panthers. They're the 10th most talented team in the league, despite the terrible year they had last year. I think that was a fluke, personally. But I also think the 15-1 year they had before was also a fluke. They're going to have somewhere between that this year. Vegas projects them for 9 wins. I can see 10, maybe even 11, but the division looks really strong here, so 9-7, 10-6, vying for a wild card spot would not surprise me, because their defense is so good. I mean, they've really only got one guy that's not really that great for them, but he just had a bad year last year, and that's it. Luke Kuechly, Shaq Thompson, and Thomas Davis are three of the best linebackers, and they're all on the same team. They added Matt Khalil on their offensive line. They got Julius Peppers back to his home team there. Mike Adams in the secondary, and they drafted one of my favorite players, Christian McCaffrey, who scares the ever-living hell out of me. I really do think it'll be him as Offensive Rookie of the Year, him or Fournette, but McCaffrey definitely scares me. Of course, they still have Jonathan Stewart, but I think they're going to give McCaffrey quite a bit of playing time this year. They really only lost Mike Tolbert and Ted Ginn, who neither one of them really did much for them last year anyways, so I don't think they really minded it. It cleared some cap space. Their defense is talented from top to bottom. Extremely strong front seven with Kawan Short, Julius Peppers, Charles Johnson, and of course I mentioned Kuechly, Thompson, and Davis already. Adding Mike Adams in the secondary definitely helps them, because if you don't have a secondary in this division, you're going to get beat down. The running game looks amazing. Of course, we already know Cam Newton can run the ball. Jonathan Stewart's pretty good. And as I said, McCaffrey. I really like McCaffrey here. They're a very veteran team, especially on the defense. A lot of these defensive players they have been in the league for 8, 9+ years. So they've pretty much seen everything, which, I mean, that bodes pretty well for them as long as they're healthy. Only downsides I can see, the offensive line needs to be a little bit better because Cam was under a lot of pressure last year. Both left and right tackle are their weakest spots, and that's usually not a good combination, especially with the sack potential that you have in this division with the Falcons and Bucs have some pretty good defensive linemen. Last year, their wide receivers were some of the worst in the league. They had more drops than any team in the NFL. Despite having what on paper looks to be pretty good with Devin Funchess and Kelvin Benjamin, they just didn't play well. Only Greg Olsen was really the consistent guy on the team, which, I mean, he's a top 3, top 5 tight end in the league anyways. He's going to get his. Yeah, but I think they could potentially vie for second place in the division. I don't think it will happen, but they have the talent and the potential to vie for second place here. Vegas has them at 9 wins. Yeah, like I said, I think that's about right. 10 wins I could see happening here, but I'm not so sure about it. Moving on to the Bucs. Vegas has them at 8 wins. I think that's too low. I think they win 10 or more. I'm pretty high on this Bucs team. I don't know if that's a good thing. It's probably not. Let's see, I can't even find their. Here we go. The defense looks really good. They added Chris Baker on the defensive line. J.J. Wilcox as the safety. He's really solid. They really only lost Mike Glennon, and they added Ryan Fitzpatrick. So they really didn't lose any players. I really like O.J. Howard out of the draft. They're saying he was one of the best tight ends. Him, along with Mike Evans and Deshaun Jackson, that's a pretty good core for Jameis Winston to throw to right there. I'd be super happy if I was him. Mike Evans, one of my favorite wide receivers in the league. I've loved him ever since he played at college. He scares the living hell out of me. Doug Martin's on his 3-game suspension, but the running backs there look fine. Charles Sims is pretty good. They'll do fine with or without Doug Martin, whether or not he's going to play beyond this year or lose the starting job. They'll be fine anyways. They're great. They have a great defensive line with Robert Ayers, Gerald McCoy, and Chris Baker. Like I said, it's probably the best part of their defense. They've got a pretty solid secondary as well. Brent Grimes has been one of the most solid cornerbacks in the league, along with J.J. Wilcox. Their offensive line, though, that's the weak spot, and they have, according to Pro Football Focus, they have the third worst offensive line in the league. Apparently, it was due to injury, and the potential is there for them to be better, but they haven't played like it. So they could be the third best, or they could be the third worst. I mean, it really just depends how they play this year and if they're healthy or not. But they look scary good if that offensive line performs. But otherwise, it's going to limit their effectiveness. Other than that, they just have those running back concerns, which I personally don't think is really a problem for them. But they're definitely going to win more than 8 games this year. I'd be pretty surprised if they didn't. As a Falcons fan, I'm a little concerned with that. Anyways, last team, of course, I saved the best for last. It's Atlanta. Vegas has them projected to win a paltry 9.5 games. You're crazy if you don't think Atlanta is going to win more than that. They are absolutely going to win 12-plus games this year, regardless of if the schedule is difficult or not. I don't think the schedule is even that hard. 12-4 is my number that I've got them winning. I went through all the games and looked myself, and I feel like that's about 12-4 plus or minus 1, and I'm happy either way. They're going to make the playoffs for sure. Who did we got? We got Dontari Poe from the Chiefs, Andre Roberts from the Lions, and we drafted Takaris McKinley, who, alongside my boy Vic Beasley, the defensive line is getting better. It's getting more scary. We really only lost 3 guys. We lost our fullback, Aldrick Robinson, as a wide receiver, and Paul Warlow. He doesn't even matter because our linebackers are better now anyways. Just to start throwing out the stats, the Falcons have the 6th best offensive line in the league. Alex Mack, 2nd best center behind Frederick from the Cowboys. Nobody on our offensive line is rated below 70, so everybody is average or better than average. Arguably, we have the best running back duo with Tevin Coleman and Devonta Freeman. Feel free to argue that with me, but I think these 2 guys are the best duo. Arguably the best wide receiver in Julio Jones. I mean, it's between him, OBJ, and Antonio Brown. But if I was starting a team, I'd want Julio if I could only pick one. He's almost unguardable. When he's healthy, he's going to produce, which, by the way, Julio Jones averages more yards per game than any wide receiver in NFL history currently as it stands. We have the stacked title holder with Vic Beasley. We had the top 2 rookie tackle leaders last year. Both of them, in Keanu Neal and Deion Jones, had the most tackles of all rookies, number 1 and number 2. The next closest was 20 off of both of those guys. So our rookies were massive for us last year. They're going to be even better. Keanu Neal is an absolute freak athlete. I absolutely love him. Deion Jones is amazing. Unfortunately, what was his name? I can't remember. Some guy we just had got suspended for 10 games. I don't really care. I don't think it's that huge of a deal. Jalen Collins. Jalen Collins got suspended for 10 games. We're probably going to release him anyways. I don't really care. I don't think he's that big of a deal because we're getting Desmond Trufant back, who was a Pro Bowl CB, who played like 2 games last year. We went all the way to the Super Bowl without him. So we're getting arguably our best defensive guy back aside from Vic Beasley. So the defense is going to be even better last year. I'm super excited because the offense is basically the same. We're going to be fine. Our defensive line got better. I mean, the Falcons are the number 1 most talented team according to Pro Football Focus. And we basically lost nobody and gained better players. Dontari Poe on the defensive line makes me so happy. He's such a run plugger. When you have Vic Beasley and Takaris McKinley on the outside, you've got pressure. Keanu Neal, just as a free safety hanging around, I would not want to be a wide receiver knowing that he's hanging around back there. That would just scare me to death. And Trufant, as long as he's healthy and doesn't re-injure his leg, or maybe it was his shoulder, but he's one of the best DBs out there too. So to be unbiased, of course, our tight end position is a little weak. Just haven't seen a lot of production out of it, really. Losing our fullback is a little bit of a bigger deal than I think people would realize, just because of the extra blocking for Freeman and Coleman, especially when you get on third down and near the end zone. He was one of the best blocking fullbacks in the league. But just a disclaimer, of course, I am a Falcons fan. I try to be unbiased, of course. Last year I pegged them to win 4 games, because of the year before they had was terrible. We had such a rookie defense. Of course, they absolutely outplayed my expectations. But they're projected to win 9.5. I think they win more than that this year. I think they win 12 or more. Really, the only tough teams they have is the division. And honestly, I think they lose. I could easily see a split with Tampa, a split with New Orleans, only because it's New Orleans and we have problems with them every year. I'm just going to chalk it up and say we lose to New England. I would be super happy if we beat them, but it's New England. And I pretty much just have New England win 16 games, and somewhere along the way they might lose one. Who knows? I chalked Seattle up as a loss, but I really don't think that's going to happen. I just wanted to make it a little bit more fair. So 12-4 was the number I came up with. But plus or minus 1, we're going to be 13 or 11, somewhere in there. We're still going to make the playoffs. But yeah, that's pretty much it for all the divisions. So here's my playoff predictions. We'll start with the NFC. I have Atlanta as the number 1 seed. I still think they're the best team in the league, at least on paper. Their defense is going to get better. The offense, we already know how good it is. I don't need to say much there. There's a lot of good teams in the NFC this year. I think it's just there's problems. There's big problems with almost every other team. I've got Green Bay second, and we know how bad the defense is. We know how bad the running game is. They just have too many holes. They're going to win because of Aaron Rodgers. We know this. But I don't think it's going to be enough to outpace the Atlanta. Same thing with Seattle. I have them third. Offensive line, terrible. They're not going to be able to run behind it. If Russell Wilson gets hurt again, they're going to have problems there. We know the defense is amazing, but they're not going to be able to be a 1 seed just with that, I don't think. Personally, I think Seattle could be a 2 seed. I'm going to just say Green Bay, though, as a 2 seed, because I think I cannot see them having as down of a year as they did last year. I mean, they still made the playoffs, but I'm going to say it was a down year for the Packers last year. The 4 seed, I've got the Giants. Again, that division is such a mess. It wouldn't even surprise me if 3 teams in that division got in the playoffs this year. I don't think it'll happen just because it's really rare, but it could. I think they're the most overall balanced team in the division this year. The offensive line is a little meh, but they'll get it done, I think. Wild card 1, I got the Vikings. Really like the defense. Offense isn't flashy, but they get the job done. They get to beat up on the Bears, and that's pretty much 2 wins there. And they're probably going to get 2 wins off the Lions. I don't think the Lions are that great. So that's 4 right there. Wouldn't surprise me at all if they split with the Packers. That'd be a huge boom for them. But I think they can definitely make either as a wild card 1 or 2. And wild card 2, it was really tough for me to try and fit teams in the wild card because the NFC is just so strong. To me, it's either between Tampa and Washington. I don't know if that's a little weird, but I think it's going to be one of those. I ended up writing Washington down here because I like the defense, the defensive improvements. I like their offense a little bit. I don't think it's as good as Tampa's offense, but it's really just a tough one there. I'm taking Washington in a coin flip, essentially. Wouldn't surprise me at all if this was Tampa Bay, though. It could even be Carolina. It could be the Cowboys. There's just any number of teams. So I'm going Atlanta, Green Bay, Seattle, Giants, Vikings, Redskins as my NFC. For the AFC, I've got New England as the 1 seed. I don't need to explain that. Pittsburgh is the 2 seed. I don't feel like I need to explain that either. Simply because they are the second most talented team behind New England, but it's just really a matter of if they're gonna get injured or not. Because if Bell's out for any extended period of time, that's really gonna peg them down a little bit. I've got Oakland at 3, although they could actually be the 2 seed if they play to the potential and they have a better defense this year. They could easily take the 2 seed from Pittsburgh. So that's kind of you could swap those two around either way. Tennessee is the 4 seed. They're going to win the division. I'm like 95% positive they're going to win that division. Mariota, if he's healthy, is going to take them to that division title finally. I can't even remember how long it's been. Kansas City is wild card 1. They're going to win 11 plus games. I just don't think it'll be enough to outpace Oakland. Although, really, you could swap either one of them around. They're both going to get to the playoffs. They're both going to have 11 plus wins. So KC could be the 3 seed, or it could be Oakland. I'm just going to say KC's the wild card simply because their offense is not going to be able to win them some games. It's just not prolific enough. It doesn't put up enough numbers. The defense is really damn good, but I don't think they're going to sweep Oakland like they did last year. Wild card 2 for the AFC. I had Miami. I don't think that's going to happen anymore with Tannehill out. I was pretty confident Miami could make the playoffs, at least as that wild card 2 slot. Now I'm not so sure. There's a bunch of teams that I want to put here. Houston, maybe Cincinnati. Hell, I'm even considering putting the Chargers in as a 3rd team from the West. And last year, we almost had 3. It was almost the Broncos, Chiefs, and the Raiders. It's not out of the question. That is the toughest division. All the teams in those divisions have some of the most brutal schedules in football, simply because they all play each other. I really should take Houston here because I always slight Houston and they always prove me wrong. But I'm just going to go ahead and go out on a limb and say that the Chargers make the wild card 2 slot just because I'm really not sure who to pick here. It's kind of a toss-up to me. So to recap, I got New England 1, Pittsburgh 2, Oakland 3, Tennessee 4, KC, and the Chargers as wild card 1 and 2 respectively. And that pretty much rounds up all that. For the Super Bowl, I really do think that Atlanta and New England are going back to the Super Bowl. They were 2 of the healthiest teams last year. You have to be healthy to get far in the NFL. Honestly, I don't see who can beat New England, and at least in the AFC side. Even a Pittsburgh team at full strength, at full health, Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, Big Ben, all those guys healthy, is still questionable to beat New England. That's not even a lock to me. And of course, they just get hurt every year. Somebody on the Steelers gets hurt, and that's what ruins their team. So you can count on some of these teams getting hurt. I just don't think Oakland's defense is good enough to stop Tom Brady. I don't think Kansas City's offense is good enough to beat the Patriots' defense. We've seen Kansas City lose multiple times to New England in the playoffs and in the regular season, and they cannot produce the numbers. Tennessee, if they were to play New England, I think they're just too young. They've got a great team on paper, but I'd really just have to see how the season develops. So, I mean, to me, saying New England goes to the Super Bowl is just the safest option anyways. You just pretty much put them there because they go there every freaking year, it feels like. As far as Atlanta goes, same reason I gave earlier. All the other teams in the NFC, despite being really strong, to me, they're not as balanced. They're not as balanced as Atlanta is. Atlanta's defense is going to be better. We already know that their offense is solid. Of course, it always comes down to health. But after torching Green Bay and Seattle last year, I feel pretty confident that we're going to go back. I mean, we're definitely going to make the playoffs. I don't think it matters what stadium we play in. I would give us a pretty good chance against any of these teams if we were both at full health. The only one that really scares me, honestly, I guess would be the Giants. Green Bay's defense doesn't scare me, and Seattle's offensive line is so bad. I mean, we sacked Russell Wilson 5 or 6 times last year, and that was in Seattle. I feel kind of strongly about Atlanta, New England going back to the Super Bowl. I'm going to say Atlanta wins, but I just want to win a Super Bowl already. Last year was way too depressing. Anyways, that wraps up my division analysis. I'm sorry it was really long, almost 2 hours. Tried to go as fast as I could, but hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.